One of the best questions of the modern college football era gets posed to me the other day, and it was, who do you think the most entertaining college football player is that you've ever watched? So I went Johnny Manzel, just kind of like, boom, really quick. That's in my lifetime. It's within just over the last decade or so. Like, everyone remembers that. And plus, Johnny Manzel was a story off the field as well, thus the entertainment factor. Well, I was flying from Miami up here to Missouri last night, and I said, let me just throw this out there. And it was like 11:30 at night. Most of you should have been in bed, and yet you weren't. You were up scrolling Twitter, and when you saw that, the replies flooded in. And so, yeah, we got a lot of Johnny Manzels, but we got a lot of folks who went all over the place. So I'm going to pose it to you, and I'm going to give you some submissions, because certainly I could go like 10 or 15 deep on this as well. But you let me know. I think the comment section may be pound for pound as lively for this as it has been for anything we've done all year. Johnny Manzel, certainly a one-of-one football player. What I think of in my own mind is that Louisiana Tech game. The first year he started, they're down late, and then they rallied. It's like 59-57 final. I think that game, even more than the Bama game, which was to come later that fall, is what I remember, because that's the first time folks went from talking about there's this gimmick-based offense and this kid running it out at College Station to saying, hey, I'm not sure that I'm looking forward to playing them. And then they lost to LSU. And so it was kind of a wet blanket on all that hype. But then they go to Tuscaloosa, and they beat Alabama. And you could make an argument, as I think the Manzel documentary did very, very effectively on Netflix, that that's one of the most consequential games in the history, in the recent history of the SEC, because it transformed Texas A&M. If you go to College Station today and you look at what is Texas A&M football, that stuff was built in a great deal because of what Johnny Manzel and then that brand became in the early portion of the 2010s. Cam Newton, a few years before that. We're going to talk to Eli Drinkets later in the show. Eli was on that Auburn staff in 2010. And, the stories that anyone could tell. Because Cam Newton not only comes in and he's out of Blinn Junior College and he's going to Mississippi State. Oh, wait, no, he's going to Auburn. And so you've got the whole how did Auburn get him angle. And then everyone's got a sly grin on their face because they all think they know. And then the NCAA joins the party. And so there's this year-long kind of subtext of, hey, Auburn's still undefeated another week. Yeah, they snuck by another week. They had like 6 or 7 one-possession wins. Everyone kept thinking next week's the week they fall off. But there's this 6'6" alien-looking quarterback they have that keeps getting better. Now, how'd they get him? We don't know. The NCAA's investigating, so you've got that backdrop. You got Cam Newton getting better. And then Bama is in the middle of what becomes the Saban dynasty, but they lose a couple of games. So Bama, in a rare move, is out of the national title picture that year, but Auburn's undefeated. And you know the Iron Bowl's coming up. And so Bama kind of redefines their goals, and it's let's make sure we take a crowbar to the kneecaps of what's happening down at Auburn. And they did for the better part of 2 quarters. They get up 24-0, and then Auburn decides to make the second half theirs. And 28-27, I believe, was the final. And so you've got, from an entertainment standpoint, people who were agnostic to college football totally invested in the Cam Newton Auburn season. Before then and after then, Gene Chizik's career, very forgettable as a head coach at Auburn, but he was the head coach that year. Michael Vick, early 2000s, total like video game mode at Virginia Tech. And it's so like antithetical if you think about the traditional Virginia Tech approach under Frank Beamer. It was special teams, it was hard-nosed defense, and then all of a sudden there's this kid from Virginia, the state of, named Michael Vick, because he wasn't Mike yet, he was just Michael Vick. And he goes there and he's doing stuff that really made you sort of recalibrate how you thought about football. I remember hearing my dad talk about this one time. He said, I've come to define in my own mind what it takes to win. Here are the things that win. Here are the things that lose. But you've calibrated all that based on the mold of a normal quarterback. And you have what is normal, and then you have a scale of how good or great is a normal quarterback. Mike Vick wasn't normal. And so he comes in, and you find yourself asking, wait, can Virginia Tech, can they win a national title with him? And they came close. They got to the game itself. But you don't name many other guys off that Virginia Tech team, do you? You name Michael Vick. And then, of course, he goes on to do it in the NFL as well. Barry Sanders is the only guy I went back to the 80s for. I could easily do Bo. I could do Boz. I could do Herschel. But I think a lot of you in our audience are a little bit younger, so you named newer guys. But I really implore you, you've seen plenty of Bo and Herschel, especially if you grew up where I grew up. I don't know that a ton of you have watched Barry Sanders' 1988 season. 2,628 yards and 37 touchdowns. He did it in 11 games, guys. Also, I mean, obviously you remember him with the Lions and you watched what he did in the NFL. I don't think enough people go back and watch him in college. It's just a way of movement. It's a way of elusiveness that I don't think I've ever seen any other back feature. Barry Sanders, also a one-of-one kind of guy. Tyrann Mathieu in that 2011 season with LSU, I think, fit this description. If you're talking most entertaining, because you got the Honey Badger nickname attached to him very early on, and a lot of us were aggravated by it. I hated it. I didn't know what one was, and I hated it, and it really aggravated me that it seemed like there was this aura or mystique that he took on more so than just let's focus on his play on the field. But then again, this is an entertainment-based industry, and so that's what people do. But, you know, he was in a secondary where you had like Eric Reed in that secondary. There were people around LSU who would legitimately argue with you. Mathieu, pound for pound, is probably the third best DB talent they had in that secondary. You know what? They may be right. But in terms of pure entertainment value, you were watching where he was at all times. He's very effective in punt return as well. So I buy that. I absolutely buy Lamar Jackson. If you just snap your fingers, say Lamar Jackson at Louisville, where does your mind go? It's got to be that Clemson game. I've got the numbers written down here. You want to talk about a paper popper of a game. 27 of 44, threw for nearly 300 yards. He ran it 31 times for 162. That's not over the course of a season. A lot of times when a guy's effective with his arm, and I give you his rushing statistics, he'd have like 31 for 162 over a season. Lamar had 31 for 162 that night on the ground and also threw for nearly 300, and they lost because that was against Deshaun Watson's Clemson. So that's what I think of with him. At Tavon Austin, ton of you went to the West Virginia well and talked about Tavon Austin, two-time All-American. In 2012, this is kind of similar to Lamar, different position. He had 1,290 receiving yards, had 643 rushing yards, and also returned punts and returned kicks. Vince Young, yes. Kyler Murray, yes. Jameis Winston, yes. Deion Sanders, before any of their times, yes. Darren McFadden, I selfishly put on there because I remember watching Arkansas one day in person, and him and Felix Jones, and it was just as violent as I've ever seen anyone run the football in college. And I probably still stand by that. I watched Derrick Henry as well. Darren McFadden was just terrifying to watch. And that was back when you could play him a little different. And yet it was guys on the other side that still kind of were wobbly-legged when it was him they were having to go against. Normally nowadays, and even back then, it was offensive guys that were worried because of what defenders were allowed to do to you. That kind of turned it on its ear. So I am very much looking forward to how wrong that list is and how many guys' names I left out. And that's what it's all about, because that's what God created March for.